Welcome to Biden Brief. The content of the briefing includes: Biden visits Michigan amid Arab community's anger over Israel-Gaza war. Early election year polls can be dead on. But you can't tell which. Both Israelis and Palestinians see problems with the sanctions, just very different ones. Trump's legal bill and Biden's cash boost, inside the 2024 money race. First, bank losses revive concerns over U.S. commercial real estate. Biden visits Michigan amid Arab community's anger over Israel-Gaza war. Washington Post. President Biden made his first campaign visit to Michigan on Thursday, meeting with members of the United Auto Workers Union and visiting a black-owned restaurant while studiously avoiding any interaction with the large Arab American community in this state, which has been outraged over U.S. support for Israel's war in Gaza. Top Michigan Democrats have pressed Biden for months to spend more time campaigning in their state, but officials have been worried about his visit being overshadowed or interrupted by demonstrators. Early election year polls can be dead on. But you can't tell which. Washington Post. Polls conducted in January and February of previous presidential election cycles have proven to be inaccurate indicators of the eventual outcome, according to Philip Bump in the Washington Post. Bump analyzed the polling data from the past 5 election cycles and found that the support measured for the Democratic or Republican candidate was off by anywhere from 0 to 12 points. He concluded that while polls conducted early in the campaign season can provide a snapshot of public opinion at the time, they are not reliable predictors of the final result. Both Israelis and Palestinians see problems with the sanctions, just very different ones. New York Times. Israeli and Palestinian leaders have responded predictably along ethnic and ideological lines to the Biden administration's sanctions against West Bank settlers. Far-right Jewish nationalists denounced the penalties as unjust, while some Arabs said they did not go far enough. The sanctions were announced in response to increased violence by Jewish settler extremists. Settler leaders and ultranationalist lawmakers insisted that the settlers were the victims, with one claiming that the settler violence campaign was an anti-Semitic lie. However, the violence has been well documented. Some settler leaders called for similar action to be taken against Arab residents who had thrown stones at settlers. Trump's legal bill and Biden's cash boost, inside the 2024 money race. Financial Times. Joe Biden has more money to spend than Donald Trump, with his campaign and affiliated committees ending 2023 with $118 million in cash on hand, compared to $65 million for the former president. Biden's fundraising operation brought in roughly $13 million more than Trump-affiliated political action committees. Biden spent just $67 million in 2023, less than a third of the $210 million that Trump spent on campaigning. Trump's legal problems have been sucking up cash, with pro-Trump groups spending $52 million on legal fees in 2023. Meanwhile, pro-Biden groups have $52 million more cash on hand as their candidate wages his re-election campaign. Biden's position as an incumbent president has also helped the Democratic Party open up a cash advantage over the National Republican Party, with Democratic Party committees and their affiliated super PACs raising over $70 million more than their Republican counterparts. First, bank losses revive concerns over U.S. commercial real estate. Financial Times. New York Community Bancorp, Azora Bank and Deutsche Bank have all warned about their exposure to U.S. commercial real estate as concerns grow over weakness in the sector. Weakness in the market has been linked to lower occupancy levels and higher interest rates. Azora Bank, which said it would make a full-year loss in 2019, suffered a 21% fall in its share value. However, Goldman Sachs in Tokyo has said the sector is not likely to present a systemic risk as it accounts for less than 0.1% of the loans at major Japanese banks. An OxyContin advertiser will pay $350 million in the first-ever opioid marketing settlement. CNN. French marketing company Publicis has agreed to pay $350 million to settle a lawsuit accusing it of falsely marketing opioids as safe. Publicis is the first advertising company to settle a lawsuit related to the opioid crisis. It agreed not to take on any more opioid clients as part of the settlement. The company worked with consultancy McKinsey to develop Purdue Pharma's Evolve to Excellence campaign, which advertised OxyContin to doctors. McKinsey has also faced lawsuits related to its work with Purdue, and agreed to pay $573 million to states in settlements. U.S. plans strikes on Iran targets in Iraq, Syria as Gaza truce hopes rise. South China Morning Post. U.S. strikes in Iraq and Syria in response to the killing of 3 U.S. soldiers by a drone in Jordan will include Iranian personnel and facilities, according to American officials. The U.S. has assessed that the drone was made by Iran. The CBS report follows days of conjecture about how Washington would retaliate after 3 U.S. soldiers were killed on Saturday in a strike on their base. The fatalities were the first U.S. deaths in an escalation of violence across the Middle East since Israel's war in Gaza began in October. Haley calls out Trump and his PACs for spending $50 million on legal fees. CNN. Former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley criticized Donald Trump for spending over $50 million of political contributors' money on legal expenses, and suggested that this was why he had not been holding many rallies. Haley also suggested that Trump's anger after the New Hampshire primary was due to his financial situation. A Washington Post Monmouth University poll showed Trump with a 26-point lead in South Carolina, but a CNN poll found that Haley was currently running ahead of Joe Biden among registered voters in a national survey. A Biden-Trump rematch would be mostly about Trump. CNN. A new CNN poll finds that the 2024 presidential election will be another referendum on former President Trump. Most Biden supporters said they would be voting against Trump, while most Trump supporters said they would be voting for Trump. Trump currently has the support of 49% of registered voters compared to Biden's 45%. Trump's unfavorable rating has dropped over the past year, while Biden's has increased. Concerns about Biden's age are cited by 46% of Democrats and Democratic-leaning registered voters, while Trump's demeanor is the most cited concern among Republicans and Republican-leaning registered voters. According to the poll, former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley would beat Biden 52% to 39% if the election were held today. Trump currently has the support of 70% of Republican or Republican-leaning registered voters compared to Haley's 19%. Turnout among key groups in key states will be crucial. Biden will have to convince younger progressives to turn out in large numbers, while Trump will try to peel union support away from Biden and focus on white, working-class voters in Rust Belt states. Group of Palestinian Americans skip Blinken meeting over Biden admin's support for Israel's offensive in Gaza. CNN. A number of Palestinian Americans refused to attend a roundtable meeting with U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken on Thursday to discuss the situation in Gaza in protest against the Biden administration's ongoing support for Israel's offensive in the war-torn Strip, a military campaign that has exacted a massive humanitarian toll. How a second Trump term will redefine foreign aid. Foreign policy. The Trump administration is planning to reshape U.S. foreign aid to eliminate support for LGBTQ rights, gender equality, abortion, and other progressive causes. A report by the Conservative Heritage Foundation outlines a plan to dismantle diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives within the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID. The report also calls for the removal of the word gender from all documents, and a redirection of funding from local partner organizations to religious groups. The aim is to replace deep state employees with conservative thought leaders to carry out an executive-driven agenda. Renewal of U.S.-China science deal hinges on personal safety, reciprocity, Scholar. South China Morning Post. New issues that were not anticipated by either Washington or Beijing when they signed a landmark agreement for decades ago are now central to ongoing negotiations over the PAC's future, according to a China scholar who has discussed the subject with mainland officials. New videos show towers of fire that prompted evacuations after last year's fiery Ohio derailment. Associated Press. The National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, has released videos of the explosions and fire caused by the release of vinyl chloride, which forced residents of eastern Ohio to evacuate 12 months ago. The videos, along with other documents, have raised further questions about why officials decided to release the vinyl chloride. The NTSB investigation is ongoing, with a full report expected this summer. Biden takes aim at grocery chains over food prices. New York Times. President Biden is pressuring large grocery chains to lower food prices for American consumers, accusing them of making excessive profits and taking advantage of shoppers. The president's public offensive comes as high inflation has affected his approval rating, and he hopes to address voter concerns about grocery prices ahead of the 2024 election. Economic research shows that the cost of everyday staples like eggs and milk plays a significant role in shaping Americans' views of inflation. While the rate of price increases is slowing, the Biden administration acknowledges that prices remain too high for many families. However, officials believe there is little the president can do unilaterally to quickly lower grocery prices. Neutralizing hardliners, House Republicans using special process to pass bills. Washington Post. Late Wednesday, the House overwhelmingly approved a nearly $80 billion tax package that would renew brakes for big corporations and expand the child tax credit for millions of families, using the same process used for naming post offices. The Senate is headed for a crucial test vote on new border policies and Ukraine aid. The Toronto Star. The Senate will hold a crucial test vote next week on legislation that would pair new policies at the southern border with wartime aid for Ukraine and other American allies, leaders pressing ahead despite heavy skepticism from Republicans and some Democrats. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said he will set in motion a test vote on the national security package for Wednesday. However, with some Republicans resisting the timeline and many remaining uncommitted to supporting the border policy changes, the bill's future remained uncertain. Our southern border is in urgent need of fixing, Schumer said in a floor speech. Senate negotiators are expected in the coming days to release the text of a bill that would overhaul the U.S. asylum system with tougher and quicker enforcement, as well as send tens of billions of dollars in military assistance to Ukraine, Israel, and other allies in Asia. Negotiators, toiling for weeks to finish the deal, have kept the bill's details a closely guarded secret, but have come under heavy pressure from Republicans who are both frustrated they have not seen the bill's contents and are wary of making any compromise on border security. The Senate deal could be President Joe Biden's best chance to enact policies to address a southern border that has been marked by historic numbers of migrants seeking asylum, as well as deliver on one of his top foreign policy goals, buttressing Ukraine's defense against the Russian invasion. CNN poll: Trump narrowly leads Biden in general election rematch. CNN. According to a new CNN poll conducted by SSRS, if the 2020 general election were held again today, former President Donald Trump would narrowly win against President Joe Biden. The poll shows that 49% of registered voters would back Trump, while 45% would support Biden and 5% would vote for someone else. These numbers are identical to CNN polling on the contest in the fall of 2021. The poll also reveals that a significant portion of voters express a desire for another option if Biden and Trump are the nominees. Among Democrats and Democratic-leaning independents, 43% say they would want to see another Democrat make an independent bid alongside a Biden-Trump matchup, while 40% of Republicans and Republican-leaning independents say they would want a Republican candidate to run as an independent in that scenario. The poll also finds that both Trump and Biden continue to be deeply underwater in favorability ratings, and many say that Biden does not deserve re-election. Americans largely see Trump's views and policies as too extreme, while most see Biden's views and policies as generally mainstream. Why Biden's LNG pause has allies worried. Foreign policy. The Biden administration's decision to pause future approvals for the export of U.S. liquefied natural gas, LNG, has sparked concern among Republicans, overseas allies, and the energy industry. The move is seen as a political play to appeal to young Democratic voters concerned about climate change, but it has raised questions about the future of the U.S. as a major exporter of LNG. The pause will only affect a handful of future projects, not existing terminals under construction, but it has provoked consternation from business leaders in Asia and Europe who rely on U.S. natural gas imports. Japan has already announced plans to find alternative suppliers amid uncertainty over the future of U.S. exports. Republicans on the House Energy Committee have criticized the move, calling it a gift to Putin and a threat to the security of U.S. allies. However, some experts argue that the pause is unlikely to have catastrophic impacts, as there is already plenty of LNG export capacity coming online around the world. Furthermore, Europe has reduced its reliance on Russian energy and has made significant progress in transitioning to clean and renewable technologies. Biden targets Israeli settlers over intolerable violence in West Bank. South China Morning Post. The U.S. has imposed sanctions on 4 Israeli settlers as President Joe Biden said violence against Palestinian civilians in the West Bank had reached intolerable levels. The move marks a rare instance of the U.S. taking action against Israelis, and comes as Biden faces criticism from the Arab American community in Michigan over his support for Israel. The sanctions were issued via an executive order that lays out the groundwork for U.S. measures in response to attacks and acts of terrorism in the West Bank. The U.S. State Department later announced financial sanctions against the 4 settlers, including asset blocking and a ban on financial transactions with them. How the U.S. and Iran escaped a broader conflict in 2020. Washington Post. U.S. President Donald Trump's administration found itself in a situation similar to the one Joe Biden faces now: how to respond to provocations by Iran without starting an all-out war. In 2020, Iran fired a barrage of missiles at an Iraqi air base housing U.S. troops after the U.S. killed Iranian Major General Qasem Soleimani. The Iranian attack did not kill any Americans, but it was the first time Iran had directly targeted a U.S. position in the Middle East. The U.S. has now said it will respond to Iranian-backed militias' attack on a U.S. outpost in Jordan that killed 3 American soldiers. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Dr. Six from the Sixth Dimension, bringing you the latest news from around the world. Let's dive into our summary of today's stories. First, we have President Biden's visit to Michigan, where he carefully avoided any interaction with the Arab American community that is angry over U.S. support for Israel's war in Gaza. Next, we learn that early election year polls can be unreliable predictors of the final outcome, according to an analysis by the Washington Post. Moving on, the Biden administration's sanctions against West Bank settlers have drawn different reactions from Israelis and Palestinians, with some denouncing the penalties as unjust, while others say they didn't go far enough. In other news, Joe Biden has more campaign funds than Donald Trump, with the former president's legal problems draining his resources. Meanwhile, concerns are rising over the state of the U.S. commercial real estate market, with several banks warning about their exposure to the sector. Additionally, a French marketing company has agreed to pay $350 million to settle a lawsuit accusing it of falsely marketing opioids as safe. We also have news about U.S. strikes on Iran targets in Iraq and Syria, as well as Nikki Haley's criticism of Trump's legal expenses. A new CNN poll suggests that a Biden-Trump rematch would mostly be about Trump, with the former president currently leading in the polls. Palestinian Americans have boycotted a meeting with Secretary of State Antony Blinken over the Biden administration's support for Israel's offensive in Gaza. Furthermore, the Trump administration is planning to reshape U.S. foreign aid to eliminate support for progressive causes. Moving on, ongoing negotiations between the U.S. and China over a landmark agreement are being complicated by new issues that have emerged over the past 4 decades. The National Transportation Safety Board has released videos of the explosions and fire caused by a derailment in Ohio last year, raising further questions about the incident. President Biden is pressuring grocery chains to lower food prices, while House Republicans are using a special process to pass bills. The Senate is set to hold a crucial test vote on new border policies and Ukraine aid, despite skepticism from some lawmakers. According to a new CNN poll, if the 2020 general election were held today, Donald Trump would narrowly win against Joe Biden. The Biden administration's decision to pause future approvals for the export of LNG has sparked concern among Republicans, overseas allies, and the energy industry. The U.S. has imposed sanctions on Israeli settlers over violence in the West Bank, marking a rare instance of action against Israelis. Finally, we learn from the Washington Post how the U.S. and Iran managed to avoid a broader conflict in 2020, a situation similar to what President Biden now faces. That wraps up our news summary for today. As always, I encourage you to share your thoughts and questions. What are your ideas on these topics? Let's discuss. Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6Do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6Do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6Do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6Do Brief via email.